Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Inside the Dub with Andy and Jim. They will be bringing you our Western Conference preview, following up on the Eastern Conference preview from last time. In the meantime, we picked up a new sponsor, Tim Hortons. And if you're as excited about beef paninis as my buddy Andy here is, you'd be pretty happy about that.
Oh, I had a beef panini on the way here, Jim. Fantastic. I love Tim Hortons. Love everything that they do.
Well, you're a great representative for your country there, Andy.
We can move on to looking at the Western Conference and what teams. There's a number of competitive teams in the Western Conference who could step up and take the title. Who do you feel like you'd like to start with in the West there?
Oh, I mean, the West is, again, like we covered at the beginning, it's just a nightmare this year. There's probably 7-8 teams looking down the list. Chicago, St. Louis, LA, Edmonton. I mean, I think those being really the top teams that are going to contend, but not the only ones. Calgary is built right back up after going through a brief rebuilding period. Even Vancouver didn't have a great year last year, but that roster is a lot more solid than how they ended up. I do think we might as well start off here with the champions from last season, the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, St. Louis is a team that kind of downgraded and then looked to build up more strength there with the early trade of Jamie Benn early in the offseason. Something that reports out of St. Louis are that the fan base was not too pleased with that move. Trading one of the biggest players for their championship run, and a player who was on a very reasonable deal. In order to get a couple prospects who were flipped to upgrade their goaltending, but overall the forward group, it's difficult to say it's as good as it was last year, and while the defensive core is likely improved with the recent addition of Johnny Boychuk, the forward group, it'll be interesting to see what Mike Marsh does here in terms of getting Teemu Pulkkinen out of their top 9. I mean, they've got Crosby and Sagan and Pacioretty and some other big names, but outside of that, there's youth and there's depth up front, but not the level of top line scoring that they had in previous years.
That might be true. It's still a team that just if you try to point out any weaknesses, it's tough to find just a real glut of riches on this team, especially on the blue line. Carrying Duncan Keith and John Carlson and Shea Weber. That's 3 number 1 defensemen, legit number 1 defensemen, and that's their top 3. That's pretty amazing. And then you get some good depth there with Markov and Boychuk, and old Willie Mitchell picked up in free agency. And look at a move. I mean, bringing in Tuukka Rask like last year. Ryan Miller, they're one of their big acquisitions, ended up being a big part of their run to the championship. And so what do? They go out and they upgrade on them in the off season. So I think that I think they're the clear favorites in the West, probably for the second year in a row. Maybe the clear favorites again to take the title, or at least to go to the finals.
Yes, I mean they're as you mentioned, they're definitely a top favorite along with the likes of Philadelphia or Chicago or Los Angeles is a very strong team this year. Their defense seems to be quite the source of strength, making up for a rather lackluster prospect pool. I believe it consists of 0 or 1. 2 players at most.
We all know that Mike Marsh hates to draft players, so he's always going to be cleaning out those draft picks and prospect pool. But again, it's one of those teams that when you're going to contend like that every year at that high of a level, it usually does come at a sacrifice of the prospect list and the draft picks. Just kind of a function of that type of a team.
I mean, I mentioned the forward group being a little lessened from prior year, but the defensive core, after you mention these names, it's one of the stronger lineups defensively that I can in recent memory there with as you mentioned, 3 number 1 defensemen and then a couple of other guys who potential top pairing guys with Markov and Boychuk. Whether or not some of that gets shifted out to move up front, it'll be interesting to see what GM Mike Marsh does, but. we can continue with the Central Division and move to the Chicago Blackhawks, one of the St. Louis Blues' biggest rivals there in recent years.
Yeah, the Blackhawks, facing off against the Blues last season in the playoffs and losing in a series that I think went a little bit differently than the team wanted. Getting nearly swept, avoiding the sweep, losing in 5 games. But they look strong again this year. It's one of those things where contending in the West is a difficult thing, and all you can really do is if you're going to really try to contend, you got to try to load that roster up. And GM Connor Williams has been doing that in the off season, adding David Backes just today, as we mentioned, adding Dan Girardi, picking up Chris Letang, downgrading a little bit from Varlamov to Mike Smith in that Backes trade, but definitely helping out the forward unit. It's funny when you mention three additions like that, you think, well, this team is now the top contender in the league, but I think that there's at least 1 or 2 teams ahead of them, even with those additions. Forward unit does look solid with, of course, Taves up there at the top. Tyler Johnson taking another step forward this year. Another huge asset when we talk about contract value, making under $1 million and being a legitimate second line center who can play both power play and penalty kill units as well. Back's going to be a big help on the blue and down the middle also. And then you look at issues with Patrick Kane. Not really knowing where he stands. If he ends up having to go through any league discipline, or if anything has happened in this terrible situation, that would be a big blow to the Hawks if he ends up having to sit out any time. They may need to reconsider their strategy for this season.
This Chicago Blackhawks team is just loaded with experience. You have players like Alex Tanguay, Marian Hossa, Patrick Marleau, David Backes, and Taves and Kane at a young age with the experience that they have. It's a team that's really built for the playoffs, and you have a goalie like Mike Smith who has the potential to kind of step up his game and offers some cap hit for his value, especially for what he can provide. And you put a strong defense with Brent Seabrook, Letang, and that recently added Girardi in front of it, and this is yet another strong team from Connor Williams. There's a reason why Connor Williams has been able to be consistently one of the top teams in the WCFHL. Going back to his time with Carolina and more recently in Chicago. Connor went to the season 18 finals. He was back back again from when he was there in season 16, which came on the heels of his move to Chicago from Carolina, where he was in back-to-back finals as well. So he's got a lot of experience, knows what it takes to build a winner, and I would not be surprised if Chicago was able to go all the way in the Western Conference. It's going to be a slugfest. Between the Blues and the Blackhawks to see who takes the Central Division title, but it will be close. And there's actually one other team in that division that jumps out as a potential sleeper that would really have to slide by Chicago and St. Louis is Colorado with the recent acquisition of Steven Stamkos. Colorado's a team that has taken a long road to development with James Love, but you look at this roster and it's just chock full of high picks with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in there, Jaden Schwartz, Chris Kreider, a lot of young talent. Nazem Kadri could have a big year points wise. A defense that has an enormous amount of potential, if not a legitimate number one outside of Marc-Edouard Vlasic, but you have players like Cam Fowler and Dougie Hamilton who have the potential to really step up and be kind of a superstar defenseman and give them a defense that would rival the other defenses in the Central, such as that of Chicago with Girardi, Letang, and Seabrook, and with Weber, Keith, and Carlson in St. Louis.
I'll agree with you there. Also, Colorado does look strong, and I think that the Stamkos acquisition, I think, is something. I mean, that's a huge deal and something that maybe James wasn't necessarily thinking he was going to make this year, but it just kind of presented itself, and you got to jump when a player like that is available. So he went for it, and all of a sudden, adding a player like that, you just really up your ability to contend when a guy like Stamkos is in your lineup. He can easily be a 50-goal guy, maybe more than that. yeah, you add some of those other young forwards around him, especially guys who might be taking steps forward. I think Kadri's a big one. I think Kadri could be on for a big offensive season here in this coming year. And then, yeah, Nugent Hopkins, again, former top draft pick. And that back line, yeah, Cam Fowler, Hamilton, if those guys make big steps, a couple guys will be big-time candidates for mid-season re-rates if that's the way they start the season. And, again, another guy, you got to go Luongo there in goal, who is just going to give you a chance to win every night, and he is a legitimate number one guy, a big time, potential for as a playoff contender for them.
Yeah, I mean, he's won the WCFHL championship before, and he's been a big part on these on championship teams, and that's something that I think James Love is really hoping that he can bring to this group of younger players. There are a couple of the teams here in the Central Division. Leicester Sparks team of the Dallas Stars. A lot of Detroit content here with Zetterberg, Datsuk, Applicator, and Franzen. Mike Green. A lot of players on this team that could help make them be competitive. Looking at a playoff team, and then this is a team that is a playoff team if they're in the Eastern Conference. You'd think there, Jim, but it's difficult for them. Being in the West, they kind of have an uphill battle.
That's true. The West, I mean, you're exactly right, Andy. It's such a tough thing. And yeah, in the East, maybe they're a top three team. I do think, you mentioned Colorado is kind of a sleeper contender in the Central Division. I think you can put Dallas in that category as well, especially after they upgraded Mike Smith and brought in Semyon Varlamov, one of the better young goalies in the league, and another guy who's on a pretty decent contract considering his abilities. And then you look at that forward unit, and it's true, Datsuk and Zetterberg, those top two guys, they're going to make everybody else on that unit better. It's, if they separate those guys into first and second line, all of a sudden both lines are pretty well balanced. Or you play them together, especially on the power play, and you've got a big-time threat for scoring every time. So definitely I think that this team could, push St. Louis and Colorado. I won't put a huge amount of confidence in that, but I think the possibility is there for this team, especially after acquiring Varlamov to step it up a little bit.
Yeah, Lester is quite an active general manager, knows what he wants in a trade, is willing to go out and get it. It seems from the formulation of the roster, there's a strong preference for a certain type of player there with Datsuk and Applicator and as you just mentioned, Zetterberg, all these players. So. Continued focus towards making this team better, and it's not too far away from being a playoff team, competitive playoff team that could upset a couple people. So, as you mentioned, Semyon Varlamov, very, very capable starting goaltender. Nice move moving out Mike Smith and picking him up. He'll give them a strong boost in goal. Minnesota Wild. With Tyler Bell is a team that's just recently moved one of their top players this summer with Chris Tanev. Tough for the fan base to get behind a move like that, but also a strong focus on rebuilding and communicated this strong focus on rebuilding.
Yep, that's definitely the truth. I mean, they broke the team down a bit to do it, but that's what you got to do sometimes. You got to kind of go all in. They've got some really good looking young players on that team with already on the pro roster with Lyndon Vey. Charlie Coyle is now he's 23 or 24, but could take another big step forward. Big talented forward there. Richard Panik is another guy who's a very solid player. Maybe not the top six player we thought he might be, but he's going to end up being a very effective player in that bottom six forwards. A couple solid defensemen as well. Christian Folin, maybe we don't know exactly what he is yet, but he's stepped in and shown that he can play in the league at the very least.
Certainly. I'm excited to see what Tyler Bell will do. He's been vocal and confident since taking over the Wild, and it does seem like he has a vision. So it's one of those teams to watch. Another team to watch here is Winnipeg. They've mentioned several times the Jasmine Duprisant that they wholesale changes. Traditionally, Alex Pietrangelo and Matthew Shane that haven't been available. Anthony Mantha haven't been available. William Nylander, these high-end players, but he's made them available and has been open to having conversations about these players. Hasn't been incredibly active in the trade market since his move of Tyson Barrie for getting Tyson Barrie for Barrett Jackman there for the playoffs last year. But overall, there's some things to like on this team.
I'll definitely agree with that. And I mean, it does start with their big top two players of Duchesne and Pietrangelo. And I do know that there's been a few bites and talks about those guys. I know Drew's been more open about talking about them this year, but I would be pretty shocked if either of those guys move out of Winnipeg this season. It's having a legit number one center and a number one defenseman like that are such big time things to build around. If they could get a big package for either one of them, or maybe put those two guys together and for some kind of super package, I guess that's a possibility. It's always a possibility, and the move like that gets made. But I would be pretty surprised if either of those guys move out this season.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're going after a player like that, I think Drew Poussin knows that he wants to get some high quality players coming back. And as you mentioned, maybe package them together, go after one of these big signature players in the league. Maybe get a little something coming back alongside of it. Given that Pietrangelo himself carries a really big name, but. There's depth on the roster. You look at the team like Dallas compared to this team, though. Have high-end players like Datsuk and Zetterberg, and then they go head-to-head against the Hansels and the Duchesnes and the top players on this Jets roster. So it'll be interesting to see if it's going to be entirely competitive this year. Not a bad roster. Not a team that's going to finish in the bottom five. But sometimes it's tough being in the middle or being on the upside of the middle there without being one of the elites. So, lots of potential moves, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. We can look to round out here the Central Division with a focus on a team with one of the best up and coming teams, like in terms of a prospect base and young players, is the Nashville Predators with Cole Richardson.
I agree. I mean, Cole Richardson has done, yeoman's work in assembling this prospect list and getting these young players together. Again, maybe not a team that's going to do anything to contend this year, especially in this tough division. But some of the names on this roster and some of the guys that he's acquired and the depth of the prospect list is pretty impressive. You got a guy, of course. I just lost my Nashville roster here.
Oh, I mean, there's several players. I mean, you look at the actual pro roster itself with Alex Galchenyuk, and then you have a player like Bo Horvat, and now Yakupov could still kind of put it together, and then you look at the other players. Wait, this year they drafted Connor McDavid and Dylan Strome. So you look down the middle, they're absolutely set. Down the middle, and still have some solid players that are kind of midway through. Similar to what we were mentioning earlier with Toronto, with Claude Giroux and Ryan Callahan as players that are veterans but still young. Derek Brassard fills that need for Nashville here. Backlund as well, and that's without mentioning a strong defense, a kind of Calgary-centric puck-moving defense with Mark Giordano, Kevin Shattenkirk, T.J. Brodie. That's supplemented a bit by Rasmus Ristolainen and the physicality that he's projected to be able to bring. Lot of things that Nashville can do, and it'll be really, I think, all eyes on Nashville when Connor McDavid makes his debut, whether it's this season or next for the Predators.
I'll definitely agree, and I think McDavid will be on this roster by the end of the season. And it's true, that adding a guy who could be just that real, generational type of talent can really, the rebuild will all of a sudden go, to almost immediate contention if McDavid is what we think that he is. And, again, McDavid's going to make their forwards so much better. And then, that defense is deep with Giordano and Shattenkirk. And then Ristolainen and Dumba as the younger players coming up. I mean, that could be a top four that lasts for a long time. You've got your Giordano, one of those really, really consistent defensemen. Great on both sides of the ice, can kill penalties, can play the power play, can do it all. Shattenkirk playing the same way, and then the great potential of both Ristolainen and Dumba. And you named some of those young forwards already, and you add McDavid to that mix, and all of a sudden it's like, bang, there's a contender. So if he comes on fast and early, maybe we'll even see Nashville push a little harder than we think this year.
So we've covered off the Central Division and as well as the Eastern Conference in our previous podcast. Let's take a look at the Pacific Division here, Jim. Lots of teams out there in the Pacific. Pacific has traditionally been a powerhouse division, and this year with Calgary and Los Angeles being the likely top teams alongside Edmonton and Lawrence Bailey. It'll be interesting to see who comes out of this. We'll start with Calgary, looking at their team. John Marsh has brought this team from the depths of the WCFHL basement. Dealing for Carey Price from the Pittsburgh Penguins, a deal that featured some top-notch prospects. Malcolm Subban is alongside Darnell Nurse. Some other top-notch guys, but putting Price behind his defense that he's been able to accumulate. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Roman Josi, and Aaron Ekblad coming up, ready to make an impact on the league. This is a strong team from top to bottom, and I don't think anybody would be surprised if this team improved over the course of the season through trade or internally, and if they were able to finish in the top three and make some noise in the playoffs.
No, I think that's definitely correct. Love seeing what John's done over the last few seasons, taking Calgary all the way to the heights of the finals and then breaking them apart and doing a fast rebuild, and now they're right back into contention again. It happened very quickly. It wasn't long ago that John was picking Ekblad first overall in the draft, and you would never believe that now based on the players that are on this roster. And I think it all starts with Carey Price in net there. He's another one of those guys, one of the premier goalies in the league. Gives you a chance to win every night. Just on a 3-year contract now, so that the Flames are going to be hard up to contend for the next 3 years, really getting into it. We've got a very deep group of forwards and defensemen. Forwards led by Patrice Bergeron and Joe Pavelski, a couple of guys that are extremely versatile on both sides. Both guys can score, both guys can win face-offs, both guys can play defense. It's a really nice 1-2 punch for them at center.
A lot of assets in Calgary. They could be free to move. We saw Tenorti almost shipped out there, but those same assets could move. Charles Hudon, Sherbak, Nikita Sherbak, Mike McCarron. These are prospects that could make an impact here in the next year or two and really supplement around those top two forwards that they have. I mean, there's a focus on this two-way play. John Marsh has always kind of had that focus. He had Nick Lidstrom there as the backbone of that team for quite a while, and when Lidstrom retired, and there was naturally a bit of a drop in play, but the two-way focus with Pavelski and Patrice Bergeron, and you bring in someone like Andre Palat and also Gabriel Landeskog, in your top six, and all of a sudden that's a tough team to play against. Brian Boyle coming over from Buffalo is going to step into that third line role, it looks like, and this is a dangerous team with Carey Price in the net.
I'll agree. They're right there at the top of the Pacific. Be battling it out with Los Angeles and Edmonton. That's going to be a real tough three-way race for the top of that division.
So, what are your thoughts on Edmonton here, Jim? This is a team that picked up Taylor Hall in the off-season. Jakub Voracek's really stepped up as a top-notch player for them. They have elite goal scorer from Phil Kessel as well. How do you feel as them as a threat to kind of the Chicagos and the St. Louises and the Calgarys?
Well, I think that of course, the great Lawrence Bailey, a longtime GM here, is always going to be a contender. I would put them maybe that little half step below the real top contenders in the Western Conference. Not too far down, though, especially when you're carrying Lundqvist back there. Another one of the premier goalies in the league, another guy who gives you a shot to win every night. And Hall, if he takes another step forward offensively, this team could be right there. Another team I think definitely going to contend for the Pacific. Although, if I had to pick, I'd say they finished second or third in the Pacific. I think one of the big weaknesses, one of the only weaknesses on this team, which of course maybe they'll be looking to address, is down the middle. They've got some big names on the wings, but with Jordan Staal kind of never really becoming that offensive producer that people thought he was going to, it's kind of a tough spot. He's a decent second line center. He's an amazing third line center, but if you're gonna slot Stepan up there on the first line, then you've got Staal on the second line. It's not a terrible top two, but that's not the same level as some of their wings, Kessel and Hall especially.
And you look at some of the other teams there. You look at the back-to-back of Jonathan Taves there in Chicago with a Tyler Johnson and the David Backes, and you look at a Crosby Sagan or Pavelski and Bergeron. That's down the middle, as you say, isn't quite to that level. Now, Lawrence Bailey, year over year, has been consistent and has been competitive, as you mentioned. I mean, this is a guy who went to the Cup Finals there with just Tampa in season 14, and then won the whole thing in season 18, and has always been able to have a competitive roster without mortgaging the future. Has Victor Hedman as a centerpiece of that defense, and as you mentioned, but one of the top goalies in the league with Henrik Lundqvist. So I'm never one to count these guys out, and if they were still in the Eastern Conference, I'd say they're a clear-cut favorite to get through and battle with Philadelphia and Washington. But in the Western Conference, it's not that easy to pencil them in. A top team, I'd be shocked if they don't finish top 4, top 5 in the West with a definite chance to finish as the best team. But it'll be a season-long watch on Lawrence Bailey's part to see what moves additionally.
It is crazy to look down this roster and think that this is not this is the team we're talking about is maybe contending for that 3rd or 4th spot in the West. I mean, it's the depth of the talent. It says something for the work that these Western Conference GMs have done over the years. Looking down this roster, you think immediate contender, top 2 seed, but realistically, with the teams you named, they're probably looking at 3rd, 4th, 5th. But again, once the playoffs start, they're going to be a danger.
So, this is something overall, I think, Lawrence, he's aware of that he's made this decision to not kind of sacrifice. You look at a team like St. Louis and Chicago's been veering more towards it. With the recent trade of Niederreiter and Hurdle. You look at teams mortgaging their future for success. Calgary obviously bottomed out and then traded picks for Carey Price, and they've done that. And Edmonton did this a little bit with the Teravainen swap there, but I believe it was from Voracek. But you look at their lineup; they've retained their first picks. Not only that, but the David Pastrnak swap, they hold. I mean, Pittsburgh was the 2nd overall pick in the draft this year. They have Pittsburgh's first next year. We mentioned that in the preview for the Penguins. On an pure asset standpoint, that helps them moving forward. And I think this is something that Lawrence has been aware of, not to ship out his seconds, first, thirds, all these picks to go to win now, like a team like St. Louis would. But he's able to be kind of that close to that team. Without doing that, so it's a very conscious thing on his.
Definitely still built for the future. It's true when you look at the depth of the young players and the prospects. Maybe the best of the contenders in the West as far as looking at prospect lists, looking at the picks that remain the next couple of years, and it's true they're going to be contending for, not just 1 or 2 seasons, but this is definitely a long-term contender that we're looking at here.
So another team, finishing off the top. Well, there's top 3 to 4. Or 5 clear-cut teams here in the Pacific Division, but the LA Kings are with Bo Simson. I mean, his ability to add, formulate a team that he really wants with these LA Kings players, and top-notch guys like Tarasenko and Nichushkin as a prospect, future-oriented player. It's impressive. It's basically it's a strong Kings team, and you have Chara and Seidenberg. It's going to be one of the top teams.
I agree, and I think Seidenberg, you mentioned, that's a great pickup in free agency. I think that a lot of people were thinking about Brian Campbell and also about Dan Hamhuis as those top defensemen, but I think that Seidenberg himself is a huge addition on that blue line. Another guy who is definitely a top 2 quality guy who's going to be sitting in that second pairing. Very, very solid defensively, decent checker, decent skater. He's going to do a lot for them back there. And with Doughty and Chara as their top 2 defensemen, that makes for a very deep and very impressive defense.
Yeah, the Kings, I believe, have really made a push here to try to add a little bit more top-line scoring. They have one of the best scorers in the league with Tarasenko, and then obviously Kopitar and Carter. You don't really want to underestimate them, or Gaborik. But if he adds one of those top players with those two top D-men in front of a guy like Quick, and obviously the depth defense with Seidenberg on the second pairing, which is exceptional to have a guy like him on the second pairing with such a strong top pairing. Bo's really going to he's really going to do some damage here and maybe be able to get over the hump there that he had in the past with some of the teams like Chicago and Calgary as recently as last year. A little unfortunate, I think, with Calgary last year, but that we can expect more of the same this year. Those teams going head-to-head in the first round of playoffs.
Oh, that's the truth. And it's true what you say about maybe looking to acquire another big-time scoring winger when you've got Kopitar and Carter as your top two centers, and then, again, you mentioned Tarasenko and Gaborik, and you've also got probably Tyler Toffoli who can slot up there in the top six. It just leaves one spot open if they can pick up another top-scoring player. I'd be interested to see if Bo's been asking around looking for one of those, because you add another top scorer to that top six, like you said, that defensive front, and then Jonathan Quick in the net. I mean, that's another monstrous team here in the West.
It'll be interesting to see how the finance side hits them in terms of the salary cap. They've got some great assets with Tarasenko, Pearson, Toffoli, and their ability to have them contribute while being low cap hits. Could open up the door. You look at someone maybe on one of the teams in the East that we've spoken about, maybe someone like Blake Wheeler, or you look at the Islanders, one of their players that they're currently shopping that they can maybe go after and try to add into that lineup. Maybe someone from Winnipeg could fill in as a logical scorer.
Wouldn't be a bad idea at all to look into some of those pieces. That's the truth.
So the Arizona Coyotes here with Matt Kaminsky, always a strong team. Made a lot of moves recently. Had moved out Jamie Benn a couple of years ago. Moved out Joe Thornton this year. Has recently made another move here. Quite recently. So had Brad Richards there on the block for a bit. Always open to moving many of the players. Very strong team, top to bottom. Tough to really pencil them in as top two team in the West, top three, but they'll be competitive, make some noise, and could upset a lot of teams.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And again, I think that they are definitely going to be one of those teams fighting for a playoff spot. Maybe not the same quality as a team like the Kings or the Flames, but they've got a lot of names on this roster that look very nice. Big fan of their acquisition of Jared Spurgeon. I think he's a very underrated defenseman. I think that he's up for a big year, and his contract is going to look very nice, I think, after the season that he could potentially have in the NHL. And bringing in a guy like Lucic, a guy you know is going to be a big-time playoff performer. Andrew Ladd the same way, another really tough guy who can really play down low. To try to sometimes the best way to beat some of these teams that have this high-flying talent is to grind them down, and guys like Ladd and Lucic and Hartnell and Foligno, those guys can do that.
Yeah, I spoke with it a bit about Edmonton with Lawrence Bailey. Matt Kaminsky, known for late round selections, thick prospect list. Picked up a first in the trade there with Washington recently, and you look at players like he's been able to find Bjorkstrand there late in the draft a couple of years ago. Just recently led the WHL in scoring. Could come up and make some noise. Henrik Samuelson's a guy that was not necessarily a late round selection, but more of a depth selection that could make an impact on his roster sooner than later. So there's a lot of guys that I look at his prospect list as not really mortgaging the future and really focusing on having a strong, deep list and the ability to kind of pick his own guys there late in the draft.
Well, that's the truth. Those off the list picks can be huge if you're able to string together a couple of good ones, bring some contributors in. Those are usually guys who can contribute a little bit faster than your run-of-the-mill draft picks. And if a couple of those guys can make it up quick, that's going to give you depth. And generally, they're going to be on cheap contracts, which, as we spoke about before, is really a huge thing now in the league.
So the Vancouver Canucks were hardest hit by free agency. They were able to recruit their biggest loss there, but losing Callahan was one of the biggest losses league wide. Chicago had been hit with Campbell was a big loss, but I mean Vancouver, they're still able to maintain a really competitive roster here. Nikita Kucherov stepped up quite a bit in the past year, and is going to be able to form a good top six with Rabada and Neal, and as well as Mikko Koivu, Ryan Kessler. I'm not a big Joffrey Lupul guy. Maybe a little inconsistent at times, but he's a contract year coming up, and Chris Joyce will know that, and he'll know to expect big play out of him. Traditionally strong defense on this team. Good futures assets through Morgan Riley and some other players. So, what are your thoughts here?
Yes, the free agency, that was tough to lose Callahan. Retaining Hamhuis, though, that was the big move. You know that Chris was going to go all out to do that. You don't want to lose two of your top players to free agency. That would just be devastating loss. So he went all in and picked them up. Didn't have to go to a second bid or a tiebreaker or anything like that. So that was a real coup in free agency, and a little surprising that nobody went up against him in the Hamhuis bidding. You don't see a guy who has ratings like that and numbers across the board like him come up in free agency very often. So a little bit of a surprise there, but keeping him, retaining him really helps this defense look a lot better. If you've got Edler and Leddy and Stone as your top three, that hurts a little bit, but Hamhuis, Edler, and Leddy, that's a pretty solid top three. And Leddy, another young guy on a good deal who should take a step forward this year, especially offensively. Same with Kucherov. He looked so great last season. All the way through the playoffs, all the way really up into the finals. He didn't look great for Tampa Bay, but he looked great throughout the end of the regular season, beginning of the playoffs. Just looked like he could be a potentially dominant scorer. Not just a scorer, but a playmaker as well. So I think that they've got big expectations for him. And again, when you combine a young scoring like that on a good contract with guys like Kessler and you mentioned Koivu and that's going to be a team that, again, I think I'm shocked where they finished last season and they missed the playoffs. Especially with Pecorine back there in net, you don't expect a team with names like that to miss the playoffs, and I sincerely doubt they miss it this year. They may not win the Pacific, but I would be even more shocked for this team to miss the playoffs twice in a row.
Well, it's amazing you mentioned the free agency there. That there wasn't even a second round of bidding. Jim, you and I, we've been following this league for quite a while, basically since I retired a couple of years ago after bowing out with the Kings in the playoffs, but you've been out of the league for a few years now, but we've been following it closely. We were big hockey fans all the way through. I've never seen a free agency class this deep. I mean, I remember several years ago. Alex Tangek was the prized addition, and I believe there was a tiebreak for his services, first or second round pick. I believe it was maybe Phoenix at the time, Arizona, who ended up winning him back. Maybe they lost him, and they were in the mix. Days have changed here now with Ryan Callahan and Dennis Seidenberg and these big name players. You're able to go and add a player like you mentioned Stefan Robida earlier for Peter Beaton, and he was able to add him, fairly comfortably. And whereas previously a player with Robida's ability to step in and contribute for the upcoming season, that would have been quite hard to come by. It's surely different days here with the new 229 rules and the inability to trade players after the postseason. It's led to more equality, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues throughout next season and with the impact on the re-signings.
Oh, no doubt. That 229 rule has really helped to stimulate free agency, especially now with the not being able to trade free agents until the free agency period, until the re-signing period is complete. Just really huge impact, like you said, and also the way the re-signing system works now with the bidding system and the re-signing sheets and the player tiers. You really avoid seeing subpar guys get these huge free agency deals that we used to see. I mean, we can all remember some of the laughable free agency deals over the years as people would get too excited about a marginal prospect or marginal player who had signed with the team and touch off a bidding war for start paying $2, $3, $4 million for a player who's basically essentially never going to play, and then that definitely pretty much submarines the value of that player. You're never going to trade a guy like that. there's a player that I can't remember specifically his name. He's a defenseman coming up through the Islanders system a few years ago, before the 229 rules were in place, and before free agency bidding is the way that it is now, and ended up signing a $3 or $4 million deal, and just never ever making any kind of impact. But at that point, you also you can never trade a guy like that. No one's going to trade for a player with that kind of a deal, especially because sending him down, you're going to have to send him through waivers every time. I'm looking back on some of the old free agency deals. We look at Dan Sexton signing a deal for $3 million. More than that, 3.5, 3.6, guys like that. And who's Dan Sexton? Good luck even remembering.
Yeah, I mean, there's go back in time. I remember there's put some large ones for Teemu Selanne there a couple of years back. Teemu had this before he kind of made his resurgence, and he was going for top dollar, and really it's tough on him. I spoke to Teemu a couple times at that time about that, and it's there's a stigma attached to you when you get that kind of a dollar deal, and you walk into a dressing room, and the expectations there, but he was in this advanced age, and he said to me, he said, Andy, you got to take the money, but sometimes it's tough, tough living up to this. So I feel I agree with the strength of the free agency system. It hit Chris Joyce here this season, but he's been able to keep a very competitive team here, and will continue to do that. As we mentioned, Morgan Riley on the team. He's always been someone who goes after prospects as well. Had Kucherov internally as well. I believe he picked up Villiers this year, which is a nice pick. So we'll know that Vancouver's moving forward from a position of strength.
I think that's exactly correct. I don't think they're going to suffer too much. And hey, considering that they bottomed out last season with such a good roster, things are only going to look better for them this year.
Certainly, we can talk about the other two teams here in the Pacific, the Anaheim Ducks and the San Jose Sharks. The Anaheim Ducks are a team that have some players here that could do some damage. You look at Alex Killorn, Zach Parise, David DeHarnay's, more of a supporting player in the WCFHL. Cody Franzen can help out a team. Dan's quite ardent in his belief about drafting high quality prospects. Trying to piece together a team through the draft. He's had some strong players and dealt them way to continue this belief of drafting. This is a guy who drafted Corey Crawford a number of years ago and waited it out. How do you feel about the Ducks?
I do think we'll start where it starts for me with the Ducks is their draft this season. Only 2 picks, but 2 very strong ones in Zach Werenski and Ilya Samsonov, and guys who maybe are a few years away, but definitely on that top tier. Samsonov may have been the best goalie available in the draft. They got him with the 30th pick, and so that's definitely not just a good young player, but a good value at that spot as well. I do think that when you look at the Ducks roster, they are definitely kind of leaned more towards that rebuilding stage than they are towards the contention, and especially in a tough division like the Pacific, it's not like being in the East where having just a solid roster will be enough sometimes to help you sneak into the playoffs. I mean, you really have to be built, to win and go deep if you expect to make it here in the West. Crawford is a big-time asset, another big-time goalie, got a pretty large contract, but I think we're going to start seeing more of those bigger deals as the years go by here and some of these younger guys get off their cheaper deals, so I don't think that's too much of a hindrance. If they were to look to move him, some of these older guys, him, Parisi as well, prime players to move for draft picks or for some younger players who maybe are up and coming or still in development. Killorn, big-time asset as well, younger guy, cheap contract, maybe looking for a little more money next year, but a guy who you could see sticking around in Anaheim through the rebuild. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Hayden Fleury's another guy. You mentioned Werenski there, and Hayden Fleury's another guy who Dan was able to get in the deal with Calgary. Could be a big part of this team moving forward. So the final team we'll look at here, and it's final for a reason, I suppose. They had the rights to the first overall pick in the draft this past year, but unfortunately weren't able to, either the pick had already been under the control of Nashville. The San Jose Sharks, Doug Shipolo, new GM from last year, heading into the dispersal draft. A lot of things to like here. It was a quiet first season, effective first season, draft well, prioritized prospects well. You look at PK Subban, Ryan McDonough jump right off the page there when you look at the roster, and prospect-wise, they've recently just moved Max Domi to add Sean Couturier. But there's a lot more to like here too. Potentially another high pick this year. Dylan Larkin is a very high prospect. Philip Forsberg, great young player as well. And then you have guys like Jake Virtanen. They just recently moved Max Domi, and someone like Mitchell Stevens, they were able to get 44th overall. A good value from a player who has a nice pedigree to be able to step into the NHL like that, WCFHL like that.
Yeah, I liked their draft this year a lot. It was only 4 picks, but I liked all 4 of them. Getting Krause 10th and Senyshyn 14th, and then you mentioned Stevens and Schlappick sitting there still at 51. That's 4 very strong picks, and very, very moving really in the right direction for a rebuilding organization with those 4. I'll definitely agree. And again, great building blocks there in Subban and McDonough. And I don't imagine those guys will be going anywhere anytime soon. I think those guys will be the rocks of that rebuild for the next few years here. As we see some of the young players you mentioned come up and start to make an impact, I think we can expect to see Subban and McDonough on that blue line for quite some time.
It's my impression from a couple interviews and media appearances here with Doug Shipolo and PK. He talks about PK, as if he's his son here. He looks at him as a building block of his franchise, and with Ryan McDonough, being able to have that top pairing D. They acquired Markstrom here in the off season, and Markstrom's a guy. This team had Tim Thomas previously, who had recently retired, and had no depth, and now they wound themselves up with Markstrom and Peter Budaj. So it's not a bad 1-2, and Markstrom's got some potential there to really step into his own and live up to his the pedigree that he was supposed to have when he was originally drafted. And,
I think you're definitely right about that. People start to forget sometimes that many goalies don't develop early. It's not a surprise at all to see a guy take a longer path when he's playing in net, and Markstrom is only 25, and this is a guy who's looked at as maybe one of the top prospects in the entire league within the last 2 or 3 years. And he didn't come out and start as fast as some do in the NHL, but again, sometimes it takes a couple of years with goalies, and so I think that they'd be smart to hold on to him throughout their rebuild and give him a real shot.
Absolutely. So I guess this summary of the Sharks here concludes our Western Conference preview, specific division. Any extra thoughts there, Jim?
Well, I think we're all excited for the season to start. I think this off-season, been a lot of activity. Everyone always loves to see that when there's lots of stuff going on around the league. There's a few people butted heads here and there, and there's a couple of issues, within maybe the trade board, and then, Bo having to disband it, and a couple different, message board posts and such. But I think that that's not a bad thing. I think that shows that people are interested and people are into it, I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that, the more activity you have, the better it is. And, the league looks real strong. There's a lot of, it league's an interesting place where there's, maybe 8 or 10 real contenders for that, that cup championship. And then a lot of teams that are in just like rebuild mode. There's not a lot of middling teams that don't seem to be doing anything and are just trying to generate revenue. It seems everyone has a plan. There's just more teams trying to contend right now, which makes sense with some of the dispersal of talent and some of the older players. That we see some of these great older players from this era. We mentioned some of them in our previews, Marleau and Hossa and Tanguay for the Blackhawks specifically. Guys that you just see getting older and older, but still having value. So some of these teams, holding on to these older guys, but we're waiting for this kind of new younger generation to come up, and a lot of those younger great players are on teams on rosters that are rebuilding right now. So I'm really excited to see what what this season holds here.
It's an interesting juxtaposition there with the young players coming up and older veterans. Look at it similarly to the league itself. The general managers, you look at the top teams in the Western and Eastern Conference, Greg Domino and Dennis Jorgensen, tenured general managers. even in the Western Conference, Lawrence Bailey, Mike Marsh, Connor Williams, John Marsh. These are general managers who've been entrenched in the WCFHL. Both honestly, of course, legendary within the WCFHL. I had actually an opportunity with the Kings in season 17 to work with Bo, and he was he was a joy to be around. He was strong-willed, it was his way, but he would come in and talk to us before the games, and he kind of let us know how it was going to be, and very straight up, reasonable guy, and I've actually gotten the chance to speak with him, now in my new role, and Bo and I, we have a great relationship. So you look at these teams, these veteran general managers who are at the top, and then these younger, newer general managers coming in. You look at someone like Kevin Spitzer with Columbus, or Patrick Carlson in Ottawa, or Cole Richardson with what he's doing in Nashville, Dylan Darby with what he's doing in Pittsburgh, and it's not just the new replacing the old in the players. It's in the general manager. These upstart newer general managers. James Love has been around for a while, a long time now, but he's built his team up to where now we're talking about it with the acquisition of Stamkos, talking about it along the lines of the Chicagos and the St. Louis and these other GMs who were kind of incumbents when James Love took over. So it's overall I find it an interesting similarity between the aging of the general managers and that of the players.
It's an interesting viewpoint. I'd not thought about it. You're so correct about that. It's a very exciting time to be part of the league, whether you're on the outside in the media, whether you're on the ice, or whether you're a general manager or an owner. As we wrap it up, give me a prediction. What's your prediction for the finals this year? Just give me an off-the-cuff prediction.
Well, I'm you know me, Jim. I've always won. I'm not much of a betting man, and I'd love to bet on another a three-peat, like a third year in a row with Dennis Jorgensen and Mike Marsh there really being able to battle it out. But I don't think anybody wants to see those two teams in the final. So I'm gonna go pick the LA Kings and playing against the Philadelphia Flyers. I think LA be up against maybe the Blackhawks. We'll say the Blackhawks knock out the Blues there in the first round, in the divisional in the second round there after the divisional round, and we'll say the Kings Blackhawks, like epic duel in the conference finals. Kings take it, and I think the Flyers there. Well, take the Flyers season 21 with the big pickups. How about you?
Well, I'll tell you, that's the matchup that I'd like to see: Kings Flyers in the finals. Those worked so hard for so long. It'd be great to see him get in, and then you've got Greg, who's fallen time and time again at the hands of Dennis. And but I got to say, what I think it's going to be. I think we're going to look at L.A. Washington. I think we're going to see. Dennis and his kind of, the team that won't die, they're just so relentless, and the team is always so deep and so good. And then, we'll finally see Bo break through this year, and we'll have, the clash of Copenhagen with, Jorgensen versus Seamson. I think that would be a really great classic matchup.
It'd be a great story for the league.
Sure would.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking about this. We'll be sure to catch up in the next edition of the podcast.
All right, sounds great. I hope everyone enjoys it.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Andy.